You're listening to the Vent Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vent Podcast. My name is Brady, joined back in the studio with Billy Galenko. How are you, Billy?
Doing very well. Excited to get to this episode. It's one I've been wanting to talk about for a while, actually.
Yeah, you and I were having a conversation offline about sort of the importance of spotlighting like the local drivers of the wine industry, and that they're actually like maybe the biggest cogs in the whole space outside of maybe producers, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about the episode today and what you were telling me about the driving force behind the industry.
Yeah, I think it's really important sometimes to take a step back. We've had a number of really famous sommeliers who've gone on now to be more personalities. We've had a lot of authors and producers and people who are really just like famous in the wine space. And those are the top minds that people think about when they first are thinking about wine. But when you think about who actually really makes the wine industry run, why we're able to have these great producers and tell these stories, it's really the people on the ground. It's the people you're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. And those tend to be the wine shop owners, the people running the wine bars that you go to. They're really that bridge between these really cool stories that are producers or the really well-known sommeliers. They're the way that you actually get to interact with these wines that everybody's talking about and recommending. So I thought it would be really cool to have somebody on the podcast that is still very much working in this role, who has worked their way up through the industry, through a more, not necessarily traditional, but worked their way up through different levels of hospitality to become a wine director. So I really wanted to share a local story of someone that from a shop and a cafe that I frequent and think is really interesting.
Yeah, and so our guest today is Sarah Plath, who is the wine director and buyer at a Pharmacie in Silver Lake in LA. Is that right?
Yeah,
which is your neighborhood. Pharmacie Devin in LA, which is your neighborhood. So it's a local shop too, but it's not just a local shop, right? This also isn't just your run-of-the-mill wine shop. They have some super exclusive offerings, but also a really wide range of wines that they bring in, both on their retail side, but also on the wine bar side as well, right? Between the progressive, more sort of natural wines that we talk about sometimes on the podcast, but also those legacy producers from France and Napa and vintages that might be more sought after too. Yeah, not just your run-of-the-mill wine shop either, but certainly one that's important to the wine scene in LA.
I really wanted to have somebody from Pharmacie on it, specifically Sarah, because in my mind, it's a microcosm of where the wine world is at in general right now. It's literally at the crossroads, almost figuratively here in LA, it's at a junction of the traditional wine world and this kind of the natural wine, emerging low intervention wine kind of movement. The shop itself is a gorgeous shop. They talk about it in there, and it has this, she says that they got the shelving from an actual pharmacy from France, from like the 1800s. I think that's interesting. I'll have to go look at them more closely now. But they have like first growth Bordeaux's, like back vintage, really high quality. There's DRC on the shelves. And then if you turn to the left on the other side of the room, there's local California wines. There's also orange wines, natural wines, skin contact, pet nats. And then if you go a little bit over, there's vintage champagne, Old Sauternes. So it's interesting where you're walking around the shop and you're going through these. And it's really I feel like we always talk to people who are selling one or the other on this podcast. And it was really interesting to have her kind of discuss the audience that they have, because it's connected to this bistro that's been around for 30, 40 years. So you're getting these older, well-established LA, maybe they're more well-off, more affluent audience, but is literally at a crossroad with Silver Lake, which is known as the like part of the Brooklyn of LA. Like Silver Lake Echo Park is like Brooklyn. So you're getting a lot of these younger, I don't want to say hipster necessarily, but you're getting that crowd at the same time as you're getting a really well-established wine savvy crowd coming into the shop. So it's cool to hear how she introduces people to both sides and how through education, as well as they have a cafe connected to the wine shop, like a bistro that kind of bridges the gap through the tasting program by the glass that kind of introduces, if somebody's looking for really natural wines, introduces them to more traditional producers, and the other way around, actually. So I think it's a really cool microcosm. You may not like necessarily be able to go to Pharmacie yourself. You may not have heard of Sarah Plath before, but I think the story and what kind of Pharmacie represents resonates in wine markets around the country and the world for that matter.
Yeah, totally agree. I think listeners will get a lot out of this and get to hear Yeah, like you said, I'm someone who's on the ground day to day, literally turning on the lights and closing the door at the end of the day in a local shop. Enjoy this interview with wine director at Pharmacie Duven, Sarah Plath.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Like we mentioned in our intro here, I am a big fan of Pharmacie. I'm a fan of that whole Sunset Junction area. I'm also a big Intelligentsia fan. But anyway, big fan of Pharmacie. We go there regularly. So I'm excited to share this with our listeners and hopefully more people in LA as well. But before we dive into kind of what the shop and the cafe or the restaurant is all about, I'd love to hear more about your background, how you got into wine initially, and then how you've grown your career into this point.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, wanted to thank you both too. I'm like an avid podcast listener. If I'm alone, I'm usually listening to something. So really impressed by you guys and wanted to thank you so much for your work. And yeah, so really cool stuff. My story, I when I look back, I think my story is a little bit like ununique or like a lot of other people's, and then in some ways not at all. It's similar to others in that I did start working in restaurants at a young age, which eventually led to wine, which eventually led to fine wine and buying. But other times, my story is a little bit more unique when I think about the fact that I really wasn't exposed to a lot of wine growing up as a kid. I grew up in a really small Midwestern town in Iowa, like 8,000 people, and pretty low key in terms of alcohol. People mostly got off work, had a beer, some whiskey with a mixer or something to take the edge off. Wine wasn't really a part of the community or my family. The really only memory I have of wine is passing out homemade wine with my grandfather as Christmas presents to his neighbors and friends. I'm using the term wine, a very broad kind of definition, as like fermented fruit beverage, because this was really like wine made in his basement from like beets and sour cherries and apples and like really like crab apples from the yard kind of thing. And the other thing was that my grandparents didn't drink. So I don't think they actually ever tasted the wine. And even I could tell as a young kid that the people receiving it were like not super thrilled. And I'm like, Grandpa, are you sure they really want this stuff? This woman said she was going to cook with it, and it's fine. It's a gift. And I thought of it as that, something generous, something for adults, and maybe something not super appetizing. From there, as like teenager, young adult, college and stuff, it was just $2 Boone's Farm from the gas station, Sutter Home White Zinfandel, like that. Nothing to brag about as far as what I had going on as a kid. But yeah, it's been a big transition is all I'll say. And I don't really know where this comes from.
You have an aha moment where you were sitting at a table drinking your Sutter Home and someone came over and said, hey, try this white Burgundy. And you did. And that was
absolutely not. Oh my gosh. No, I actually, the turning point for me was there was a lot of different things that happened, but I had graduated in 2009. I got a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Iowa. It was 2009, like first housing crisis, no jobs. Just, I remember being so stressed out about finding a job after college, and finally landed like a unpaid internship in Durham, North Carolina. So it was in the Chapel Hill, like Raleigh, Durham, Research Triangle Park area of North Carolina at that time, and got this job. They paid me gas money, and I thought I had worked in restaurants in college and high school, and I thought I need to get a job somewhere to like supplement income if I'm going to keep on with this internship. So I got a job at a really small restaurant, and I was like really peak farm to table kind of restaurant in Carborough, North Carolina. And they had 30 wines by the glass, really fresh produce and proteins. And it was an eye-opening experience as far as food goes. I'd really never been around that kind of seasonal food, and I didn't really realize how different it was. But yeah, there was no bullshit about it. It was local farms right nearby and produce all year long. And so I worked in this restaurant that had this amazing food going on and 30 wines by the glass. And I really had to learn quick. I'd known like Chardonnay and Cabernet, and that was about it at that time. And it's a big learning curve and wanted to do well. It also wasn't long that I could let go from this like marketing research job. I think I had edited the wrong version of a PowerPoint or something. I was super devastated, but relieved that I had the second job, that I could pick up extra shifts and stuff at the wine bar. So I really dove into it, learned the wines by the glass, and tried to make the best of it, even though it wasn't really my plan. And I actually met a sommelier, and I didn't believe it at the time. I had read about sommeliers. I thought it was a very passe kind of position that didn't exist anymore. Some old man in a dusty cellar, like who even has that job? And he was like my age or a little older. And he's, I'm a som. I'm like, oh yeah, me too. Right. And he's, no, I really am. You can do it. And I'm like, what do you mean? And there's like structure to it. There's organizations, you can take courses. And I had no idea that there was an actual like backbone to this stuff. I thought you just learned it out of a book. And so he introduced me to the Court of Master Sommeliers, looked it up right away, found that they were offering courses not really near me, but in New York and other bigger cities. And they were expensive courses. And it felt like a really big swing, and stayed a pipe dream for a while just because I just couldn't quite swing it with my situation. But I had a friend in like early 2013 who was originally from Long Island offer me a job in the East End in the Hamptons for the summer. Basically go up there, take a serving job and just work the summer and try to make as much money as possible. And so this kind of came into my life as an opportunity. And I thought, maybe if I see what all the hype is about and work my ass off and just make as much money as I can, maybe I can swing a move to New York, an apartment, and maybe this class. And so I did, and it worked. And I worked every second I could, took a nanny job on the side, ate at work, and saved everything I could. And I found myself mid-October sitting in a classroom in Soho, being led by Christopher Bates and Laura Manick and Dustin Wilson. And I was just like, whoa, I cannot believe I'm here. I can't believe this worked. And I just thought it was an incredibly good sign. And I should just really take the chance that I had and run with it. And New York was really the perfect place to do that. Just complete endless opportunities to taste and connect with people. I tell young people, if you want to get into wine, move to a city with wine. It's not going to come to you as quickly as you can move to it. And it doesn't have to be New York, but any major city where you're likely to meet like true leaders of the industry and get close to somebody who's good and is willing to help you. But anyway, I did the class, passed the certification, got a job right away as a somm at a restaurant called The Elm in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, by Chef Paul Liebrandt. And he was such an amazing chef, such a following at the time. He had just finished Corton, and this was his new Brooklyn adventure. And I thought, wow, it's so amazing. I can work for a real chef. And so that was an incredible place to land as my first gig. But then the wine director who hired me this happens a lot, but took another job within a few months of hiring me, and I took over the program. And I wasn't quite really ready for that at the time, but luckily it was a small, like 100-bottle list. I got thrown into buying, figured it out. I also got to buy like all these cool new wines from people who were following the natural wine movement that was starting to like bud at the time, and something that people in Brooklyn were like really seeking. So it was a great stretch, but I really felt alone with it, as you do. Found myself wanting to level up, work with people, and work from a list that I could continue to learn from. So I decided again to go big or go home. I saw an opening for a sommelier position at 11 Madison Park. This was like the big time Michelin place, seen as the best restaurant in New York. And I knew I wasn't really qualified to be there, but I thought maybe I can land an interview and just something. And I did. And they quickly agreed, you're not quite qualified to work here, but you're perfect for our sister restaurant, Nomad. And so I got a second interview with Thomas Pastusak. Walked into Nomad that day, and it just changed everything. It was so impressive, and Thomas was so impressive. Nomad and everything it was doing just felt like magic, just one of those restaurants. I remember like waiting for Thomas to come do the interview and watching the service staff, and this was lunch, mind you, and they coordinated clearing an empty table, and everybody just acted so carefully and slowly took the dirty napkins off the table, placed them underneath their fingers next to the tray they were holding. So even the dirty napkins like flowed down to the ground and danced around as they walked. And I was like, oh my God, this was complete Michelin, but young and like hip and luxurious. And I'd never seen anything like it. So I was so excited when Thomas offered me a job. I was just completely over the moon. But starting that job felt like the beginning more than really sitting in the classroom in Soho. I was all of a sudden going a million miles an hour, 100-page list, like world-class wines, mostly allocated, super fine wine, $1 million cellar, 50 hours a week plus long commute, just pushing as hard as you can. I like to say that starting that job at Nomad was like trying to take a sip of water from a fire hydrant. It was just so intense. And there was just a ton of professional development at that time. I worked my way up from floor som to head som to assistant wine director as the company expanded from New York to Los Angeles, Las Vegas, and finally London.
That is quite the journey. So were your Soho classes, was that like the intro exam, like where you sat down there? Or was that
Yeah, intro and certified.
Nice. Yeah, I did my
Intro and
intro
certified.
and I think in the same room.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
But that's so cool. I think that's what I've heard from a lot of people who have worked their way up. Same thing with like Andre Houston Mack's story as well. As like a lot of these people put themselves out there. I think in wine, I feel like I have a lot of friends who are somms and in certain areas, and then they just keep thinking, like you were saying, it's like progress is going to come to them. They're like, oh no, I'll just stay here and well, this will happen. I think it's so interesting to see what happens in the wine world when you at least keep trying. I know there's a lot of like times you get shut down, but I do feel like it's a community where somebody might say no, like EMP, but then they're like, but we have this. And if you show you want to learn, people are willing to help you.
Absolutely. Eventually, yeah.
Eventually. Yeah, not everybody. We've certainly come across not that many. It took me years too. So then did you move to LA as part of Nomad, or like how did you end up out this way after all that?
No, actually, it was after. I was furloughed from Nomad New York with everybody else in 2020 for the pandemic. It was just such a devastating time, so much just death and uncertainty. It was just the restaurant industry just seemed completely broken. And yeah, for the first time, I really did not know what to do. I didn't know what to do professionally. I wasn't speaking with a lot of people. I had a lot of ideas as well. There was very little advice. Even the leaders of the industry were like trying to find out what they could do for themselves. And it was just hard. And the restaurant industry is still suffering quite a bit from this time. But I had recently fallen in love with LA. That was the thing. There's a lot of stereotypes about LA, but once you're here, I think it's very easy to realize the depth, the uniqueness of the city. It's almost undescribable to anybody who hasn't been here. LA is such a creative city, bold, thinks outside of the box. I thought it would be a really interesting place to be a part of rebuilding something and figuring out what that looks like in real time. And I moved out here with my partner at the time, now fiance, but in the heat of the pandemic, it was like August 2020, packed up my stuff in Brooklyn, found a sublet, just left. You just didn't say goodbye to a lot of people. A lot of my friends had scattered and took like an Amtrak out west, which I highly recommend, a sleeper car across country if anybody has the chance to. It was so beautiful, like through the Rockies and through Salt Lake City and all that. But made it to LA quickly. Got as settled as we could, but found some work with a private, like fine wine retailer in Santa Monica. It was a perfect position for me at the time. Wines that I was really familiar with. It was about 6 months of contract work, really fantastic. But I noticed very quickly that the environment that I was working in Santa Monica did not reflect anything that was happening when I went out go to a restaurant that turned itself into a bottle shop to go thing. Not a lot of Pinot Noir, not an ounce of Chardonnay in sight. And when I did ask for a glass of Chardonnay, got met with like blank stares. And I was like feeling like, man, I really don't have any idea what the wine culture is here. It's so different than New York. And so when I got curious and started looking, I found Angelina Wine Company, which is a winery here in Chinatown that makes wine from vineyards in LA County. So a true local winery to LA, super small winery. They basically started from a Kickstarter and an investment from friends and really great people. So I thought I knew I could learn about the little bit of wine culture I know is here from them. And so took a stretch with Angelina Wine Company. I learned how to make wine, got to go to the vineyards, mostly like up in Santa Clarita, so Agua Dulce like area, and then a few more historic vineyards, San Gabriel Mission and stuff like that. But I got a stretch of some kind of hands-on work and helped with their wine club and helped with growing their community. And it was just such an amazing time and learned so much and really took a deep dive into the history of winemaking in Los Angeles because there is such a tremendous history there. But I started missing French wine. And so I'm always determined to try to visit every wine shop in the city that I work in, or the city that I live in. So I stumbled upon Pharmacie du Vin. I knew it had some sort of connection to Cafe Stella, which is a very infamous French bistro in Sunset Junction. And it's been there for 30 years and just a total, very loved restaurant in the city. And I am a total sucker for a French bistro. I spent a lot of time on nights off at Bar Tabac on Smith Street in Brooklyn. But Stella reminded me of this more chic LA version. And so I wanted to see what their wine shop was like. And the first thing I noticed when I walked in was that it was the most beautiful wine shop I'd ever seen. The second thing I noticed was there was all this Emilio Pepe and Turley and classified Bordeaux first growths from really great vintages. And again, I'm just whoa, what is going on here? But it also had hits from the natural wine scene, cool, new, progressive stuff, just tons of scope. And I felt like it really represented what was going on in the wine industry beyond LA, more on a national level, the kind of extremes within it. And so it was also a wine shop that perfectly matched my expertise. And so when I found out they were hiring, I just really jumped on it and took over the program in November.
I'm not out in LA, the complete other side of the country. We don't have big, beautiful wine shops in the city that I live in. We do have some great wine shops, but not luxurious ones that have a high-end list. What kind of the breakdown of the list in terms of allocated Burgundy and Bordeaux, classified Bordeaux versus you're looking at your smaller natural wine producers or smaller producers from lesser known regions around the world? What's the percentage breakdown between that and how much are you guys managing? Or I guess how much are you managing as the director?
I would say it's kind of percent new progressive stuff, 40% what I would call fine wine or classic wine. These are definitions that can be argued with for sure. But yeah, I would say 60-40, about the 50-50, maybe at times a little more 60-40 now that the cafe is open.
So can you, for Brady's sake, and I guess a lot of the listeners, since they probably don't know, can you paint the scene a little bit about what the local wine, I guess what kind of your competition, I guess the other local wine bars and shops around are offering, and then share your insight into your philosophy into, I guess, why Pharmacie thought this mix could work really well here and what you guys are trying to fill in the space?
Yeah, I mean, Pharmacie is really not any other wine shop that's really close by. I don't really compare a lot of what we're doing with other wine shops. Most wine shops right now are pretty minimalistic look, clean, white lines and popular brands of natural wine, but hip, casual, and clean. And Pharmacie it's just a complete 180. It feels, I don't know, like a tiny version of Sherry Lehman meets you're in the corner of some French chateau and you're completely transported.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. So I was wondering the types of conversations you have to have with a lot of clients, because I'm within walking distance, and part of the reason we live here is we're very much, or at least my fiance is very much into the quote unquote natural wine stuff. So there's 3 or 4 natural wine bars within walking distance. Within a 5-minute drive, there's 2 focused on natural wine bars. There's a few that are not natural wine bars, wine shops. There's one exclusively, but then there are other ones that are trying to straddle the line of some old classics, but mainly focusing on natural. Do you, and I think this is a broader movement as a whole in the wine industry. So that's why I thought Pharmacie is a cool microcosm.
I think so too.
There's an older audience looking for these really big classics, and there's younger folks looking for some of the emerging. How do you find yourself having these conversations? Maybe if there's an older person, you're trying to sell these progressive wines, or the other way around, people are coming in and maybe they do have money. They're musicians or artists from up in the hills, but then they're like, why is this bottle $400?
I try to just stay pretty down to earth with people, no matter the context. The shop itself is pretty intimidating in the way that it looks. And so I really try to just get a sense of what people are looking for before I engage too much in any technical speak or hitting them overhead with a million tasting notes or anything like that. I try to listen and really listen and figure out what they're looking for. Usually when people buy wine and it's a big deal, there's something like emotional going on. And so I think about that a lot, whether it's in the shop or in the restaurant setting. What is going on? What's the emotional stake here? And once you get to that, it's really about helping somebody achieve that with a really great wine and making them feel comfortable about it.
It's a really good insight with there's an emotional stake when you're selling wine to people, bringing wine to people.
Absolutely. It's huge.
And when you can tie that, the occasion or that emotion or connection that they have with the person that they're going to be sharing that with, to the story of the wine and like its legacy and how it was created and who made it, like that's got to be super impactful. And you have such a wide ability to do that because you have both legacy, high-end legacy producer wines, but also a lot of these hip emerging wines too. So like you have all the colors in the palette, I guess is what I'm saying, to do that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I feel really fortunate, but people I find tend to be a little bit open. And back to what you were saying, Billy, I'm noticing a bit of a shift in conversation once we get there about, I like natural wines. I don't want it to taste like kombucha though. Says that I want reputable, ethical things, but I can't learn about any of this stuff. And I tend to find wines that really bridge that are natural, sustainable. That's the starting point. That's not 100% of what we're doing or why we're doing it. But I find wines that are natural, sustainable in approach, or all the way biodynamically certified, really across the board. But from there, the wine needs to taste the way, to taste like something that evokes where it was from. It needs to be technically sound, pleasant, complete to drink. I want the wines to really speak for themselves and be undeniably delicious. And whether it's like you have to say that it's natural or you have to tell them the story, the wine should really show it more than you. And so I try to just be pretty picky about what I choose, keep the bar really high in terms of quality in the wines that I place in the store. From there, I feel super confident in almost everything I'm about to sell. And you get to step away from the natural wine discussion when you just break it open and simplify it a little bit more for people.
Agreed. Do you find yourself, are you making the buy the glass list, or is that somebody on your team? And then building on that is, you guys use that as a gateway into some of the other bottles that you want to try to start selling, or a conversation?
Absolutely. Yeah, just trickles up. Just everything trickles up and out. And, I choose the wines by the glass. The staff is very small. There's 6 people that work at Pharmacie, 3 in the front of the house, 3 in the back of the house. I have 2 amazing colleagues. Stephen Cox is one of them. He also psalms at Safi's. Fiamma Fischeit is my second colleague. She is a rising star, has worked abroad, has a degree from Cal Poly. And so we're an amazing little team, but it is small. And there are some times when I'm there completely by myself all day. So I do everything from opening the shop, setting up the bistro, tasting with the wines, deciding the wines, processing the wine, selling the wine, serving them perfectly to people, stickering the bag that they buy it in. Like literally everything from the top down. And I'm there when the deliveries are there, and I can keep quality high in that way and everything in check, but pretty dialed in for the times that, that we're open, and it'll only expand from there. The buy the glass list is pretty standard. It's a sparkling orange rosé, 3 whites, 3 reds. It's for a cafe. I think that's plenty as to go with the menu. But I try to choose those wines a little bit more in sync with the kind of the natural inspiration that the space is always evoking. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but the most special part of Pharmacie is the cabinetry and the shelving of the place. So it was a cheese shop for a very long time. It's been there right along with Stella, for forever. And Gareth Cantner, longtime owner, renovated it in 2020 using cabinetry from an actual old Parisian pharmacy. So all the shelving in the store is original from like mid 1800s. Feels like it feels a lot older than it is when you walk in, even though it's only been technically open since 2021. And we launched the bistro in April of last year. And I decided the wines there and for the rest of the shop. But I do try to uh, choose wines that are almost like effortless to love. Like it's just they're perfect and they're refreshing. People want to be transported when they come hear over and over that people who come are immediately reminded of a vacation that they went to, or sorry, a vacation they were recently on, or family member from abroad. All of these little like nostalgic things come up with people. So I don't want the wines to be distracting or jarring in any way for that experience. I want them to just seamlessly go and allow the guests to be transported in the way that they want to. I make it more about elevating that experience and making it seem really easy and effortless and just allowing the guest to go there.
When you think about your role, like at the choosing the buy the glass list, how often does that cycle and how often does that change with what you're hearing folks talk about versus how much of it is like you leading people? That's related to Billy's question of, do you use that to drive bottle sales? Obviously, like you said, you do that, but how much of it do you feel like you're trying to pull the conversation forward with folks who are coming in versus you're letting them lead what you're bringing to the table?
The guests have a huge impact on what I buy. A lot of our guests at Pharmacie are longtime super fans of Cafe Stella. And so they have no problem voicing their opinion. That Stella and Pharmacie feels like a second home to people. And I tend to take what people say very seriously and go a lot by demand. What I'm pulling with people is maybe things in like more of a lateral like context. Like maybe there is like a Sancerre profile that people really love, but instead of serving Sancerre, it's like a blend from the south of France that is like pretty and floral and cereal. And so somebody can say, I want a glass of Sancerre. I don't have that, but I can push you to this and it's a little bit different, but it will not disappoint. And so you're hopefully swapping something out with a very similar profile while making them feel really comfortable about something that they're comfortable with, but exposing them to maybe something new, but something undeniably like delicious and perfect for them. I hope that answers the question. The guests are super important. Like I said, a lot of these people have been coming for Stella's entire existence and have now gone on to Pharmacie. So I'm not trying to like reinvent the wheel intentionally. And I think that maybe that's something else that puts us a little bit apart from others. It's like we lean into comfort and we give people what they want. I think that's a huge part of hospitality that just like extends to wine. Yeah, the Buy the Glass program is the starter, the beta for everything to go up and out. I change the list like every week and filter through things that maybe don't move as fast. And maybe we have one placement on the Buy the Glass list that's like a little bit of a wild card, a little bit out of the box. And that can give me a chance to see what's really received if I'm unable to get a sense of it through retail sales. And then from there, whether it be good for Stella or other parts of the program.
In terms of your audience, it's a lot of them have been coming for years. I assume some of them are older. Do you see like a mix of the younger crowd who's just strolling around Silver Lake and then these, older folks who are coming purposely on a mission? Or what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's a crazy mix. It's really just anything. And the long time like guests, the clientele are super important. They're really like why we're there. And it's also a part of Silver Lake that's very walkable and a bit touristy at times. And so you'll get straight tourists, right, but intermixed with regulars that have been there for 30. And you're really just dealing with things as they come. Really, this job as a sommelier is a dream for me, but it is more of a hosting type environment where someone might want to come in and talk about the history of Sunset, what movies have been filmed there, what's the story with the buildings, and how long have things been here, what's around, where have things moved, what did things used to be. And so you get a lot of that. You get a lot of, I just want to take Instagram photos all over the shop and post about it on TikTok. And that's great too, because we need both of those things. And both of those are really important in the wine industry right now. I take things as they come, don't assume anything, and listen, talk less, listen more, and try to figure out. A lot of people are just enthralled by the shop and want to check things out. And some people want exactly what they want. So you really just have to dial it up, dial it down, and change on a dime depending on what the demand is. But it keeps things really interesting. It's challenging, especially if you've been doing service for a long time. It's actually quite fun.
Nice. Yeah, I can only imagine the crowds. We go fairly often to Pharmacie, but then I often work multiple days a week at Intelligentsia, at least a couple. The people who are just walking by, even there, it's so many different languages. You have the occasional homeless guy who just wants to make base camp, everything. So I can only imagine. I'm always so worried about your guys' glassware. Like when you set up and it's sitting out there, I'm just like
Oh,
looking at it like,
man.
please don't bump into the table like anybody. Or dogs, tons of
He's
dogs.
surprised that more doesn't get broken, but I guess we're just risking it.
Yeah. But so from a personal point of view, I know Brady always likes to ask what people are drinking on a Tuesday night for themselves, but I'd also be interested to see what your thoughts are on the current trends or things you're excited about in the wine industry as different styles are changing or producers are emerging. Where's somewhere like a region or two that you're really excited about? So maybe some young producers right now.
I'm like re-falling in love with Corsica. That's a recent thing. Sold a lot of the wine in New York, but re-falling in love with it. Been selling some wines from Cloventori that just are just outstanding and just completely like over deliver every time. So I've been impressed by them. Some wines in different parts of the south of France, closer, a little further inland, higher up, higher elevation, or like closer to Bosque. Really interesting stuff. Rock Tizange is a producer that I've been selling recently that, again, just is like a Macabeo blend with Grenache Gris, and it's just so pretty and beautiful. And been falling in love with Sicily again and different parts of Italy, Tuscany. I've been having some great wines from Tuscany. I don't know. I think Pederi Casaccia is really great and it comes to mind right now. But yeah, and then as far as new stuff, California is just a gold mine. We have just winemakers that are not even signed with anybody yet come into the store. That's how I found Kleinliner wines, and I'm pouring his rosé by the glass right now, current release. It's beautiful Senso from Lodi, and he's not signed with anyone, and it's an amazing kind of new school example of California rosé, and it's just been doing so well, and he's going to come speak about it. And so creating relationships from the ground up is really exciting, being so close to wine country too.
The last piece that I was going to ask about was what is you guys also, so I think you guys do a few things that a lot of wine shops wish they could do regularly. Is one, you open the bistro, which I think is helpful to get people to be able to taste. We were actually just talking to the founder of Corbin for a later episode, who was mentioning how a lot of retailers wish they could have people taste. So I think that's a thing you guys do well. And then also the classes that you guys have. How can you tell us a little bit about what your thinking is behind those? Is that one more like sales driven, or is it more just like people don't really understand? Because some of them are broad, like French wine. Some of them are single producers that are coming in and it's more of a talk. How do you guys like work through that? And is that just taking what as it comes, or is there like a strategy behind those programs?
Some strategy and some kind of just impulse, but I designed this format of the classes. I'm huge on education and ran the education for the staff at Nomad for many years when I was there. I've been to a lot of tastings, I've been to a lot of classes, and so been on the other side of it. And so when I wanted to design my own format, it was a lot more of like, how is this educational and still fun and a little bit more practical for people in like their everyday lives? I designed the class as 2 parts, but the first part is intros, and we talk about how to taste wine, how to know what you like. We define things about wine and get people on the same page as sort of language that you're going to come across a lot, like acids or tannins or structure or body and that sort of thing, defining those things for people and then getting them through the whole tasting notes and subjective flavors and what that really means. And then talking about a topic and tasting through 4 wines together. And so you use this practical knowledge and insight that you found out about yourself to taste through the wines from there and hopefully get something more out of it than just those were great wines or I learned a couple of things, but learning more about your own palate, learning more about why you like what you like and why you don't, and knowing that it's okay and to just learn as you're interested in things. So the classes are designed like that. I do have my themes. Sometimes we'll just do biodynamic wines, or sometimes we'll just do like new school producers from all over the world. Sometimes we're going to like deep dive into the Loire Valley or Burgundy or Bordeaux. And I can get a broader range of people through offering different specific styles of classes. If somebody is just, I'm going to travel to France and I want to learn about some of the regions, then maybe they would sign up for a broader like French wine class. But if I have family in Tuscany and I've been there many times and I want to learn about the microclimates of the region, maybe that kind of person would sign up for that class. And so I'm getting a little bit more scope with this format, and I can dial it up and dial it back for people in a more organic way.
I've gathered that a little bit, but it's hard to tell exactly without having to attended one. So I'll have to join someday. But I certainly will. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. I think it's really fun to give people points of view from all angles of the wine industry. And I think Pharmacie, with the education, the cafe, and the shop, really does it all in one swoop. So I think that's great. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you both so much.
All right. That was our interview with Sarah Plath. I hope everybody learned a little bit about the inner workings of a wine shop, the building of a wine career. And if you're ever in the area in Silver Lake, it's a famous place called Sunset Junction. Go check out Pharmacie Divan. So that is our episode for this week. And we'll be back with another interview next week. Cheers.